So, you've described translation as a way to avoid writing, yet writing in Arabic gave you freedom from self-censorship, I would argue.
Mhm.
Why do you think Arabic, a language not native to you, offered that liberation?
Um, that's a that's a good question. I don't want to, sound cliched about it at all. I'm not really 100% sure, to be honest. Maybe it's because I felt like, I mean, I'm not. Firstly, I'm not. I don't think I'm the first person, non-native Arabic speaker there is to write something in Arabic. I mean, to some extent, given the fact that with the diglossic nature of Arabic and standard or modern classical Arabic is to some extent a foreign language to everyone, even to the native speakers. I mean, it's not completely separate from the spoken dialect, but just the way that, there's a difference between like formal Hindi and Urdu and the sort of everyday Hindustani. Um, it's even more exacerbated in Arabic. So everybody learns it to some extent, even if they speak the slang version of the same language. I would argue it's a spectrum. So everybody, to some extent, it's a foreign language for everyone, and that kind of levels the playing field, I think. And I think I was just prompted to write about my life experience in Arabic. When it did, it kind of just flowed out in a way that it never had in English. And I think if other people found it more interesting than, I find it.
Yeah. So, just getting back to the question of Palestinian voices and how does the Western literary market shape Palestinian voices who get translated or published?
That's a problem, good and question. And, you know, I think especially since from the last year onwards, I fear that because, there's been like a genocide happening and, and people are dying. Palestinian people have been dying in such in unprecedented numbers, I think, since, the Nakba. And so that, to understandably, to some extent, has made the presence of voices that push people to think a little bit more differently, a little bit more nuanced in a sense, has perhaps pushed those voices more into the margin. Or I fear that it may, because, you know, like, okay, now there is a ceasefire and so on, but the need of the hour has been kind of so urgent, that people are dying, that you know we need to kind of support the resistance. It's kind of a sad sort of version of, support the troops to some extent. I don't know how else to put it, but you know, I know with last this piece that I just published in Makhzen of Raji's, there was some worry that, this is not the right time for such reflections like this, where, you're kind of challenging the holy cows of, the tenets of Palestinian identity. And he wrote a small afterword because he had originally written this. It's been a few years now where he, sort of re-reflected on, the sort of total sort of paralysis you feel as a writer when, there's death, in this magnitude being, live streamed in front of you. Like, you know, for the first time,
Hmm.
you kind of feel like, what is the point even of writing anything? So, um, I guess, my worry is that the it's a fact that, and I think we've gone beyond the point, of like when Edward Said said Arabic literature is embargoed, and people are not I mean, it's true that the English language, especially the American English language reader, like there's some ridiculously low percentage of books that are read that are translated books, like even from other European mainstream European, languages. I wouldn't say Arabic is a marginal language at all, but um, I guess my worry is that the market will only want those, to translate, those Palestinian voices that again offer this kind of very heroic version of the Palestinian experience that, is more about, you know, it's not that it didn't exist, but I don't think that Palestine or the Palestinian struggle is in that place, and that, it will. I was jokingly, with some friends, like calling it intifada capitalism, where,
Hmm.
you will see, there are like certain now restaurants and like ventures and so on that, okay, everybody, it is a capitalist world and so on, but just like, there's been rainbow capitalism, so I think there is some intifada capitalism going on. I feel like I worry that the literary market will just, want to kind of fall in line with that rather than like, seeing Palestinian writers as writers who should express themselves and express the complexity of the Palestinian experience, and perhaps open up people. I mean, I was with Raji in this residency for translators in November, and it was wonderful. I was a little bit worried because here's someone coming straight from occupied Palestine. Okay, he himself is not from Gaza, but still, like, he's living the war there and having to live amongst Israelis, and here he is coming in the to the countryside of upstate New York, and he was worried that it would not, of the dissonance of that. But I think it went wonderfully well, just because I think it was so defying of the expectations of what people thought a Palestinian writer would be, that I think it was an amazing experience, and I wish that there would be more experience, and that has been always the experience whenever we have done like events and readings and talks together.
Yeah, your work often kind of challenges the idea that queerness is a Western import by recovering its presence in Arabic literature. But South Asian literature also has its own parallel histories, like Sufi homoerotic
Mhm.
poetry,
Yeah.
Hijra communities, queerness encoded in mythology of sorts.
Yeah.
How do you see the relationship between Arabic and South Asian queer literary traditions?
Well, I see them as, on one spectrum, from the kind of boundaries of West Asia up till the boundaries of China. I do think that to some extent or the other, we belong to a shared tradition that is, connected between Arabic, Turkish, Kurdish, Persian in its different forms, Urdu, Hindi. You find a lot of the same motifs and the same themes. And I don't want to glorify the pre-modern representations of homoerotic desire at all. I mean, some of them, by today's kind of ethical standards would be considered pedophilia, or borderline pedophilia, and I don't there's no point trying to, like, paint that in nice, but one can just understand it, you know in its own context, and still appreciate the beauty of the work of the poetry. Yeah, that's an interesting, like, question. I mean, I think when it comes to like South Asian, depictions of same-sex cultural depictions of same-sex, there's the monotheistic aspect. Oh, sorry, polytheistic aspect that is not there in Arabic or in Persian so much. Although the whole question of, I mean, looking at the pagan practices of pre-Islamic Arabia is also like a whole other fascinating thing that I love reading about. And so-called Jahili poetry, which is the poetry of, it's the earliest Arabic poetry, we supposedly have. It forms like the
Yeah.
backbone of classical Arabic, and it's an incredible, like, you feel almost like there's no separation between the speaker and the environment around them, whether it's the flora or the fauna or the weather and so on. And there are some not explicit but implicit like depictions of desire in some of the poems I've read. There's not sort of normative heterosexual desire.
Yeah. So I want to uh, shift into something else a little bit. You mentioned in your translator's notebook that some purists might consider using English phrases in an Arabic text to be rakaka, poor
Mm.
style, right?
Mm.
But you see it as reflective of real speech.
Mhm.
That speaks to a broader sense, a broader issue. Who gets to decide what is proper in language?
Mhm.
And building upon that, do you see translation as a political act?
Yes, yes and no. I don't think it should always be reduced to being a political act, or rather, I would say we shouldn't only just look at, you know, the politicized or the political aspects of the translation, because that can end up doing, the aesthetic and technical efforts disservice, just as, you know, in the other extreme, like if you only look at the aesthetic or artistic technical aspects of translation without any real like historical, social, political context, that can also be end up doing it a disservice. But yeah, so that's my answer. But what were you asking about in terms of style and policing of style?
Yeah, in your translator's notebook, you sort of, you know, talk about, sort of the slangifying or like rikaka, right? Using English phrases in an Arabic text has been like criticized as being like rikaka or
Mm-hmm.
poor style, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's so just like building on that sort of argument you're making,
Mm.
you
But
know,
you're asking like what's the difference there between Arabic and in the South Asian context?
no, just in terms of like slangifying
Mm-hmm.
and just sort of like this criticism that it may be what is real speech, right?
Or
When you're
what is
translating.
good speech or good style
Yeah,
or good
yeah,
I mean, there is
yeah.
a difference just because the difference between the written register and the spoken register is quite wide, even in comparison to like, you know, Hindi or Urdu with like just with spoken Hindustani. So to some extent, it's like people self-regulate or self-police. And I don't think, I think it's in terms of like resisting being overrun by English or cultural imperialism, like it's definitely good to find, a way to express yourself in Arabic, for example, without having to constantly insert English or French. At the same time, that can also become a reactionary kind of Puritan thing of
Hmm.
wanting to, speak a pure language, and that it can have some reactionary like
Hmm.
what is it consequences, like for example, people claiming like there's no word in Arabic like gay, so that means that identity, being gay is just a Western imposition, and you know
Hmm.
or people can also say that as a way of like justifying cultural colonialism or pinkwashing that, they only have derogatory words for queer desire. Look how, they don't, you know, they deserve like the colonial impulse. But I don't know more. I don't have like a specific kind of one position on it. I mean, I do think that just looking conventionally or historically, like in the South Asian context, it's kind of just more acceptable somehow to have words from English inserted a lot when you're talking or you're writing, as compared to Arabic, where you're more like expected to take
Yeah.
that part out, especially when you're writing, but also when you're like speaking in a more formal context.
Yeah, in your translation of Sorrow in My Heart, you mentioned
Mhm.
slangifying dialogue to capture the real ways people speak. And I think like queerness too has a kind of linguistic code which is like subversive, coded, playful, right?
Mhm.
And how do you think like, queerness and this idea of like slangifying language interact in translation, I guess, in your work?
I mean, it depends. I should plug, thanks for mentioning Sorrow in My Heart, because Hilal Shuman, the writer who's a Lebanese writer, who is now based in Toronto, he's also one of the other contemporary writers, really like writing very fearlessly about uh, queer with queer characters and queer themes. And again, it's not only to become like a niche kind of, the one who only writes about queer stuff, but his like writing a novel. This novel is about actually a Lebanese German character who was during the Civil War was given up or kidnapped from his parents as a very young child or baby and adopted by German parents. So, he's grown up in Germany as a German kid, but knows he's from somewhere else but doesn't know anything about, and he goes to try and find his biological parents while also like, you know, questioning his sexuality at the same time. And also in a context of Berlin post the massive arrival of Syrian and refugee and Palestinian refugees from Syria, um, who end up kind of also being another way that I don't want to give away the whole book. But this was apparently a phenomenon during the Lebanese Civil War, which was, one was obviously there was a lot of kidnapping and forced disappearances, but there were a lot of young kids who were either taken, like kidnapped, or sold by their parents to be adopted by families in Europe. So, sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Yeah,
Uh,
just in
but
terms.
yeah, so in that novel, like that, a lot of it is told from the point of view of this character who does not speak Arabic, but the narration itself is in Arabic. So he is speaking English and German, but he goes on his first trip to Beirut, and in his interactions with people, so he hears them speaking in this kind of mixed slang of Arabic, English, French, which is quite common in Lebanon. And so I wanted to try and reflect that kind of messy linguistic situation, which is like the total opposite of like pure good style in a way,
Mhm.
to the extent that I could. And translation to some extent is always a losing battle, and you have to kind of be okay with that, I think, before you
Also,
embark.
also the process of reclaiming sort of certain terms in Arabic, right? Uh, like I don't know.
Like luti, which is a Quranic term, but it's also like a derogatory. It's like the same as sodomite, basically.